Welcome to Capitol Hill. The opposition leader has decried the carbon price legislation as socialism dressed up as environmentalism and called today Betrayal Day. The Nationals leader, Warren Truss, says it's a hatchet job on democracy and says it's the day when tyranny came to Australia. But the government says the passage of the carbon bills through the Parliament this morning are the start of a step into the future. Joining me are two MPs who had to return from a parliamentary delegation to the United Nations for the vote today, Labor MP Kelvin Thomson and Liberal MP Steve Ciobo. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon, Lyndon. Steve, long time no see.
We'll start first with the flavour of the day that's been.
Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, noes 71. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Order. The gallery is to come to order.
Mr Speaker, standing orders do need to be suspended because today this parliament has witnessed the unseemly spectacle of a government cheering itself for breaking its own election promise. We have witnessed the unseemly spectacle of government ministers celebrating a betrayal. Mr Speaker, they celebrated their betrayal with a kiss, Mr Speaker.
Today, this House of Representatives moved from words to deeds. It has moved from what has sometimes been a rancorous debate to action.
Kelvin Thomson, the government's been celebrating the passage of the carbon bills today, but will the decision to put a price on carbon cost you the next election?
I don't think so, Lyndall. I think what we've done is to step up and take responsibility to do something which everyone knows needs to be done. And I think in doing that, the Australian people will accept that the price on carbon will take us towards the clean energy future. I know the opposition likes to talk about it as a tax. In fact, it's a tax cut. Lifting the tax-free threshold from $6,000 to $18,000 will take 1 million Australians out of the tax system altogether. We've got compensation for pensioners, for families, and a whole lot of carbon price money going into ensuring that our industries will be supported and that clean energy, renewable energy industries will be able to grow in the future. Steve
Ciobo, your leader said this morning that his pledge to repeal the carbon tax was one written in blood. Do you know what that means?
It means we're very committed to repealing it, is what it means. Look, we as an opposition, Lyndall, have a very basic approach here, and that is that this is a reform, as the government likes to call it. We call it a whopping great big new tax on all Australians. It's been introduced, and we're calling it a day of betrayal because that's exactly what it is. 5 days out from the last election, Julia Gillard, as Prime Minister, said there would not be a carbon tax under a government she leads. Yet here we are. I mean, this is a massive break of faith with the Australian people, at a level, frankly, that I don't think has been seen in recent history.
Kelvin, under the many things Julia Gillard said before the last election, one was that she wanted to take the people with her on the journey towards carbon pricing. She's flipped things the other way around, hasn't she, in this case? You've passed the legislation and now you've got to take the people with you.
We've been having a debate about carbon and climate change for about 20 years, and all the Liberal Party leaders and many of the Liberal Party MPs, including Steve, have said sooner or later we are going to have a price on carbon. We are going to have an emissions trading scheme. It's going to be the case in developed nations, other nations around the world. This is something which needs to be done and frankly is overdue. We're seeing action in Europe, we're seeing action in the US, in China, in India, and all sorts of places where we need to reduce our carbon emissions. We've got a trajectory which is going up. We need to turn that into a trajectory which is going down. This is action which needs to be taken. The government is acting in a very responsible fashion.
But why not give people the chance to... Linda, what I don't understand is why the Labor Party are denying Australians the chance to have their say on this. I mean, you can't... Look, everything you said, let's just say for the sake of the argument that it's agreed with. There's still a fundamental problem here, and that is that your government has no mandate for this because your Prime Minister said she would not do this.
The idea of mandate is pretty cute, coming from an opposition which blocked the carbon pollution reduction scheme. In 2007, we went to the people saying we will have an emissions trading scheme. Indeed, the Howard government went to the people in 2007 saying it would have an emissions trading scheme. Tony Abbott signed up to it. So it's a bit cute for them to talk about this, having, after the 2007 election, turned around and blocked that legislation in the Senate.
And Steve, isn't it the case that during previous debates, many members of the coalition have stood up supporting an emissions trading scheme, and some of them, at least one, Malcolm Turnbull, still does, although he didn't speak on the debate on this legislation. Haven't you changed your views, flipped 180 degrees from where you were in 2009?
No, the big difference, Lyndall, and what's taken place is that we saw at Copenhagen the abject failure of the international community to come together. That's the very big difference. Now, we have an issue now about whether or not Australia should take action. Let's be clear. Both parties are of the view, when I say both parties, the Coalition and the Labor Party, are of the view that we need to take action on climate change. We have that in common. What else we have in common is a commitment to a 5% reduction by 2020. Again, we have that in common. The difference is the approach. We're saying that this is not the time for a carbon tax. We think a carbon tax is the wrong approach, and we think that the way to achieve it is to do it in conjunction with international efforts, because Australia only contributes 1.5% of global emissions.
Now, both of you had to return from the United Nations for this vote because the opposition was refusing pairs. However, the opposition did lose one number last night when the member for Indi, Sophie Mirabella, had herself thrown out of Parliament.
The honourable member for Indi is warned. The honourable member for Indi is warned. I name the honourable member for Indi. I have named the honourable member for Indi. The Minister?
I move that the member's services be suspended from the House.
The question before the Chair is the honourable member's services, or the honourable member be suspended from the service of the House. I put that question. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells. The result of the division is ayes 71, noes 57. The honourable member for Indi is suspended from the services of the House for 24 hours.
Steve, you had to come back from the UN to provide the coalition with a vote, yet your vote was effectively negated by Sophie Mirabella being thrown out of Parliament. There have been reports you had to pay your own way back. Will you be asking her to refund some of your airfare?
Lyndall, let me pull you up on a couple of things. The first is that I wasn't forced back. I chose to come back. And I indicated some months ago that I would choose to come back. I rang Tony as leader and said that I would be back to vote against Labor's carbon tax. So that's the first furphy that I want to put to bed. The second is that, look, I understand Sophie being passionate about this. The fact is that in a perfect world, sure, no member of Parliament would ever be booted out of the chamber. But it's happened on both sides. It's part of, unfortunately, what happens when people are passionate about something. Sophie is deeply passionate about opposing Labor's carbon tax, and what she was trying to do was table a petition from thousands of people in her electorate opposed to Labor's carbon tax. So, I understand that she was passionate about trying to get their voices heard and on the record. Unfortunately, went one step too far. But look, I'm not concerned about the fact that she got booted out. I think it was for a good cause, for lack of a better term. And from my perspective, I have absolutely no regrets about making the time to come back, paying for the ticket, because I am firmly opposed to Labor's plan.
Lyndall, it's very noble of Steve to seek to take the rap for his leader, but I have to say to you that Tony Abbott wrote to Julia Gillard on the 22nd of August and said, "I wish to advise you that the opposition intends to grant no pairs for the vote on the carbon tax legislation. Pairs previously granted will not be recognised for the purpose of this vote," and this was confirmed by Warren Edge writing to Joel Fitzgibbon, the Chief Government Whip, saying that the pairing for Steve and I to go to the United Nations is conditional on the votes for any bills related to the imposition of the carbon tax not being taken during the period of the pairing. If the votes are brought on during the period requested, then the pairing will be rescinded immediately. So it's noble of Steve to take the rap. The fact is that Tony Abbott has to accept responsibility for what has been a pointless exercise in futility. And as for Sophie Mirabella, she has a history of getting into blues, including with members on her own side with Petro Georgiou. She resigned on Malcolm Turnbull, now with the Liberal Deputy Speaker. I think from Tony Abbott's point of view, he has better people available to him on his backbench, including Steve, including people like Judy Moylan and Sharman Stone, and he would do well to replace her.
If we could go now to the issue of consultations with leaders. Kelvin, on the morning your party removed Kevin Rudd, you called for more say for the parliamentary party on policy decisions. Since then, the Prime Minister's said the Labor Party platform on asylum seekers is ambiguous and allows for her people swap. John Faulkner says it's not ambiguous. Is the consultation under Julia Gillard any better?
I think that members of Parliament are putting their views forward and we are having vigorous debates. We've certainly had a vigorous debate on the question of asylum seekers and the Malaysian solution. We've had a vigorous debate on the question of live animal exports. Just yesterday in the caucus, Tony Zappia moved a motion requiring the mandatory stunning of animals which are being exported.
It was watered down, though.
That is true, but it is also true that parts of Tony Zappia's resolution have been picked up and adopted by the government, and the mood of the caucus is such that it wants to see animals stunned, but is persuaded by the minister that he is moving very rapidly in that direction. So I think that the efforts of Tony Zappia and others have been very useful in that regard. So I've put forward proposals myself in relation to migration, overseas aid, electricity prices and the like. So I think there is quite a lot of debate. There's also a lot happening. The government is doing things in relation to increasing superannuation, reducing company tax, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It's doing a lot.
If I could just finally get you both to reflect on the worth of your visit to the United Nations, what the trip brings to you as a backbencher. Steve, you first.
Look, I think it's very valuable. I mean, Australia is a very big contributor to the United Nations. I think we're the 12th largest globally. I think it's very important that we as parliamentarians, and this is set in a bipartisan spirit, have a good understanding about what the United Nations does, the way in which taxpayers' dollars are being used, the effectiveness or otherwise. And the reality is that you don't get that unless you're on the ground there, working in the various committees, working in the General Assembly, and actually observing what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's been an insight, a chance to see that. Plus, this is an historic occasion. We've got the quest by Palestine for them to have statehood. Kelvin and I had the great opportunity to be there for Obama's speech, for Mahmoud Abbas's speech. I was there for Netanyahu's speech. So it is quite extraordinary.
And Kelvin?
Yes, I agree with everything Steve said. The first day I arrived was the 10th anniversary of September the 11th, and I met some of the families of some of the 10 Australians who were killed on that day, and to hear them talk about lives interrupted and cut short and promise unfulfilled, that's something I'll always remember.
Kelvin Thomson and Steve Chodo, thank you very much for your time.
Lyndall. Cheers.
Good to talk with you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Join us again tomorrow.